Hi, everybody. This is Congressman Mike Levin. Thank you so much for joining us for another virtual town hall, another great guest. We are so honored once again to have with us the Reverend Madison Shockley, pastor of the Pilgrim United Church of Christ in Carlsbad, right in the middle of our beautiful congressional district, California 49. And in addition to his pastoral duties with Pilgrim, Reverend Shockley serves on the board of the American Civil Liberties Union of San Diego and Imperial Counties, as well as the board of the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. Reverend Shockley, it is great to see you, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us.
Very glad to be here, Congressmember Levin. Very glad to be here. And very glad that you're here.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we went on, we were talking about the events of 1/6. And, obviously, we are just still getting over that terrible day. But, this month, we are now moving into Black History Month and a celebration as well of the extraordinary contributions of so many Black Americans throughout our history. And I want to just stress the importance of also taking this time to continue to recommit to action, focus on justice and opportunity for the Black community. Last week, you may have tuned in. I hosted a virtual forum with our friend Congresswoman Karen Bass to discuss the policy priorities. I know Reverend Shockley goes way back with Representative Bass to discuss some of the policy priorities that we are planning to advance to address the systemic racial injustice, economic inequality, voting rights, and so much more. And Karen is right in the middle of those fights. And I'm just honored to serve with her. And I'm thrilled to have you, Reverend, with us today to keep that critical conversation going. And before we dive in, I just want to restate the obvious, which I do every one of these events for the last year, which is that we're still in the middle of a very serious pandemic. And we've got to take COVID-19 seriously. We've got to do everything we can. And I implore everyone, please continue to follow all the mitigation measures that we know will reduce community spread of COVID-19, help protect one another, help protect yourself, wear your mask, avoid large gatherings. And just yesterday here at the United States Capitol, there was an awful but very powerful moment where we came together and we mourned for 500,000, 500,000 people in the United States of America that have tragically lost their lives due to COVID-19. It's incomprehensible when you start thinking about 500,000 people and what that really means, the human tragedy that this is. We are praying for the families that are impacted by this. Everybody by now has someone they know, some friend or family member, in many cases, multiple loved ones that have died or become seriously ill as a result of COVID-19. In California alone, we have confirmed now over 3.5 million cases, and we're about to cross our own threshold in the state of California of 50,000 deaths as a result of COVID-19. So please, as we've said now for the past year, the best way we can get through this pandemic is to follow the steps we know will control community spread. And while we continue to roll out the vaccine, and we're seeing fantastic news around the efficacy of the vaccines, let's just remember that masks are still our first line of defense. And we've got to still prioritize wearing the mask, protecting yourself, protecting your neighbors. But if you're, of course, eligible to get vaccinated, by all means, please get vaccinated as quickly as possible. These vaccines are safe, they are effective. Please get vaccinated. And if you have any questions about where you are on the priorities list, you can go to the county website, you can go to the state website. Please, if you have any questions at all, you can always contact our office. The important thing is get vaccinated. I am back in Washington, and we are going to have a very busy few weeks. This week, I'm going to be voting on the American Rescue Plan. And if you haven't been paying attention, that is President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris's bold and aggressive plan to address the public health and economic crises we continue to face because of the pandemic. This comprehensive relief package will bring critical aid back to the district and the communities all throughout the country that are most in need. I'm not going to get into all of the details of the bill right now, but suffice it to say that the American Rescue Plan will deliver immediate relief to working families bearing the brunt of these crises. The plan will provide an additional $1,400 per person in direct assistance to households across America. It'll provide direct housing and nutrition assistance to families struggling to get by, expand access to safe and reliable childcare and affordable health care, extend and expand unemployment insurance so that American workers can pay their bills, and give families with children as well as those without children a boost through enhanced tax credits. And I'm very hopeful that the final version of the bill will retain a section that would give tens of millions of American workers a raise by increasing the federal minimum wage. We still need to pass the bill in the House. As I said, it might be Friday, might even be Saturday. We're going to see what changes are made in the Senate, but make no mistake, this critical relief is going to get to our communities very soon. The American Rescue Plan is the first phase in dealing with the public health and economic crises that we're facing. The next phase, the recovery phase, is the Build Back Better plan. That'll be a major jobs and infrastructure and climate plan, and we're already getting to work on that as well. Long story short is that we're working very hard right now. There's a lot going on, and I'm really excited about the coming weeks and months. Another area and a specific topic of our discussion today is finally advancing long overdue justice and equality reforms. Millions of Americans across the country continue to demand accountability and reform to a system that has allowed police brutality and injustice against people of color for generations. And next week, I'm proud that we're going to be introducing again for the 117th Congress, because every Congress, you got to reintroduce the bills that didn't pass or didn't become law the last Congress. But next week, we're going to be reintroducing a bill that Karen Bass and so many others have worked on, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. And that's going to help once it passes the House and gets to the Senate. And I hope those conversations and negotiations will occur quickly. And I hope this time we're going to get a bill to President Biden who will sign it into law so that we can help bring about the long overdue changes that we need. I'm a proud co-sponsor of the Justice in Policing Act, and I think it's just one of many steps that we're going to take towards a more just system to ensure that George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and countless others are never forgotten. At the same time, we've got to pass some major reforms to protect the right to vote and to protect our democracy. H.R. 1, the For the People Act, and H.R. 1, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, will help end voter suppression schemes, establish automatic national voter registration, end partisan gerrymandering once and for all, and quite a lot more, like getting the dark money out of our politics. So critical legislation, and legislation is so important, but that's not all that's important. It's also very critical that we start listening to one another again, that we start helping each other again, advocating for one another, and speaking up for those who need the most help. And my sincere hope is that conversations and forums like the one that we're having today will give everyone in our district, and maybe even outside of our district, if they're listening or watching, an opportunity to learn something new, to ask questions, and to reflect on how we can all work together to achieve lasting change. So with that, Reverend Shockley, I'd love to turn it over to you for some opening comments.
Thank you, Congressmember Levin. It is my honor to be with you today in this town hall to speak to my neighbors and your constituents. I think that the changes in the country of late are very important for our future progress. This is Black History Month, and during this month at Pilgrim Church here in Carlsbad, where I serve, we're observing Black History Month, and we have a presentation each Sunday morning, and we also have our anti-racism book club, and we're reading currently James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time, and Notes of a Native Son. I encourage everyone to take this opportunity during Black History Month to read a Black author. Read James Baldwin for the historical perspective. Read Caste by Isabel Wilkerson for a more contemporary perspective on where we are and how we got here. But that's what's important. Black history is American history. We are part of this country and have always been part of this country. And one of the important things about the 1619 Project, it shows that the very foundations of this country were Black and white and indigenous people. That the enslaved Africans that landed at Jamestown in 1619 from the very beginning set the tone for this nation. And we've been wrestling with how to come together across color lines ever since, for over 400 years. That was the question then. What will we do with these Africans that we've brought here, that we've enslaved here? They could have made a decision then. You know what? It's only about 20 of them. I think we can absorb them into our culture and we can all move forward as free citizens of this great land. Unfortunately, they didn't make that decision. A number of times throughout our history, we've had the opportunity to do the right thing. And we still have the need and the opportunity to do so. So I implore all Americans that we come together to solve the problems that confront us, that lock out people of color from the opportunities, resources, and advantages that American life offers to everyone else. Discrimination, as has been written by Heather McGhee in her recent book, The Sum of Us, actually costs everyone. It does. Now, the brunt of the cost and the most brutal end of discrimination and racism falls on people of color and Black people here in America. But the price is paid by all of us in an unjust society, in a less productive society, in a less cohesive society. And we see what division and discrimination have done to us so far. So I hope that we can look forward to a future where we all commit to ending systemic racism, to ending discrimination, ending white supremacy, and building a future where all people are regarded equally before the law and in the eyes of one another.
Wow. Thank you for those powerful words, Reverend. And we're going to have to get a list of those books and make sure that we're following up. So before we sign off tonight, we'll have to get all the information about that. We had our constituents send in questions. We had a number of great questions from them. But before that, I'm going to ask you a few questions myself before we dive into those submitted questions from our constituents. It goes without saying that COVID-19 has been extremely difficult for everybody in the community. There's a lot that we're going to need to do to help people back on their feet. I hear from so many of our constituents who are struggling to pay their rent or to put food on the table. But Reverend, what are you hearing from your congregation and people in our community about the biggest challenges that they're facing during the pandemic?
Well, absolutely, the number one issue is health and the pandemic. We haven't had so much in our congregation, but family members of our congregation. We have lost one member of our congregation and others who were very, very ill. I personally lost a good friend of mine, Gene Ruffin, a Carlsbad resident, just a month ago. And others are concerned about their health and the health of their families. For those who are grandparents like myself, they're cut off from their grandchildren and even their children in many cases. And that's heartbreaking because that's what you look for when you get to our age. I have a saying, having grandchildren makes having children almost worth it. And to be cut off from our young grandchildren is a heartbreaking thing. But many families are not employed fully. They're not able to pay their bills. They're not able to pay their rent. And even though there's been a moratorium, the backlog of unpaid rent is catastrophic for many families. There's no way that they'll be able to pay them if they have to start working and paying off this past debt while they're trying to pay their current rent, especially if they're not making $15 an hour at least. And as well, our preschool and the preschools here in the community are trying to provide childcare for families so that they can go back to work. But we haven't yet put our teachers and our daycare workers in the rotation for the vaccine. We've got to get our teachers and our childcare workers. I know they're next and they're coming, But that's one of the great concerns. We also have the commodities distribution from the San Diego Regional Food Bank at our church once a month. Families continue to line up to get the food that is being offered through the food bank. But that just tells you that the tip of the iceberg of the need in our community. And so people are concerned about getting the vaccine. People are concerned about still catching coronavirus and becoming sick and ill. They're concerned about employment. And so all of these things are what I hear from my congregation and my community.
Well, I want to extend my condolences for the loss of your friend. I lost a friend as well recently that I'd spoken with just a few months before, seemed to be perfectly fine. And the next thing, he had COVID and had passed away. Also, just want to thank all the people in the community doing such great work. You mentioned the San Diego Food Bank, and it's always going out and helping. And I've gotten to do that a few times. It's both very rewarding, but also heartbreaking to see, particularly in a community like ours. You've got a lot of veterans who are in need, and just see people that have served their country not have a secure place to eat or a secure place to live or enough to eat, enough food on the table is it's just deeply distressing, and we need to do everything we can to help.
The rental crisis is yet to really hit. When those moratoriums expire, I don't know what people are going to do. And of course, having to find a new place to live, they can't pay the rent where they are, and families combining only exacerbates the pandemic problem.
Well, as you know, I had a forum with our friend, Congresswoman Karen Bass last week, and we discussed a wide range of issues that we need to address to lift up Black communities specifically. And we talked about voting rights, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, police reform with the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, talked about climate change and specifically environmental justice legislation, and many other areas that we have to focus on. So I wanted to ask you, Reverend, thinking about all these priorities in Washington, do you think we're missing anything? Where do you think our emphasis should be?
I think all of those are critical areas. The George Floyd Reform of Policing Act is vital. One of the things we learned in reading James Baldwin, he was so prescient and prophetic. And we ask ourselves, have we not made progress in the 50, 60 years since he wrote? But if James Baldwin were to come back today and see what happened to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless others, I understand there was a person in San Clemente that was killed by the police in September, but we're just now seeing the body cam footage. The threat from this kind of incident is constant. It's random, but it's pervasive. And every Black person lives in a degree of fear. And hopefully we can do something that would mitigate the police practices and procedures to bring safety to every resident.
Well, you're absolutely right. And we did have a horrible incident in San Clemente, the details of which we're now just learning. And I can tell you in the last couple of days, not only did we see this new video of a homeless, unarmed African-American who was killed, who evidently was jaywalking, and obviously the situation got out of control, and he wound up killed. And I was deeply troubled by the video. I spoke with the sheriff. We had a good and productive conversation. There is an ongoing investigation. There's also an ongoing lawsuit as well. So not to get ahead of any of that, but to say that it was deeply troubling, and that I think the Justice and Policing Act that we're discussing hopefully would help. The other thing that I know that I can agree with the sheriff on, and that I think we all can agree on, is that we need more mental health services, social services for those who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. It was clear that the gentleman, Mr. Reinhold, that was tragically killed in San Clemente, he had mental health challenges. And you just wonder, how could we do better for all of those who are homeless or on the brink of homelessness, who are facing mental health challenges. And I hope that we can achieve some positive progress in this regard in the coming year or so as we consider the George Floyd bill and other efforts to try to improve mental health services. And of course, it's partially a federal issue, but also a lot of work needs to happen at the state level, county level, and municipal level as well. And I know that work will continue. Wanted to switch gears to maybe a lighter question. One of the things that I get to do that I really enjoy is I try to find one constituent a month who has not been recognized perhaps as much as they should. And, you know, we try to highlight them. We try to give a shout out to them each month. The very first one that I got to do as a member of Congress, very first constituent of the month, was Shelby Jacobs. So Shelby is an Oceanside resident. He is a retired aerospace engineer, and he happened to be one of the very first African Americans to work on NASA's space shuttle and Apollo program, and just in general, he's an amazing guy. So my question for you, Reverend, is who out there are the other hidden figures in our community that you would recognize for their contributions that maybe have been overlooked?
I'm glad you asked that question. And I didn't have to look beyond the pews of my own congregation, where I see Professor John Ford. John Ford came out to California from West Virginia, attended UCLA, and earned his PhD in anthropology, and came here to Miracosta College decades ago, and probably in the 60s, I imagine. And he wanted to teach genetics. And in fact, he worked on the original Human Genome Project. But Miracosta hired him to teach Black studies. He had no education in that field, but he was Black, so they figured you could teach Black studies. But ultimately, he got on the faculty there and was able to teach in his field of anthropology and genetics. A fascinating person, a brilliant scholar and scientist. And I'm very pleased to bring to the attention of this community Dr. John Ford, a pioneer in the sciences and a wonderful, wonderful person.
All right, well, we're going to have to connect with Dr. Ford, and perhaps we will give him our constituent of the month. It sounds like he's extremely deserving, and we'll have to follow up after this forum.
We'll be glad to do that.
I want to get to our constituent questions. We have a bunch of questions. We'll get to as many as we have time for. Frank in Encinitas asked, I'd really like to understand systemic racism better, perhaps through some examples, not police oriented. Also, why is this such an issue today, and why hasn't it been addressed in the past, particularly during the Obama administration, which would have had a heightened awareness of such problems? Reverend, you want to take that?
I think the biggest example of systemic racism is the status quo. By every measure, whether it is employment, whether it is housing, whether it is education, across the board, African Americans are not given access to the opportunities, are restricted from places of employment and housing. And this has been across the decades, across the centuries here in America. And so when you have clear things like redlining, when you have housing discrimination up into the 1960s, those patterns are still with us today. To outlaw housing discrimination in the 60s didn't all of a sudden integrate the rest of America. It just locked in place the segregation and the discrimination that had built up to that point in time. And so unless we're taking deliberate and intentional, dare I say, affirmative actions to undo the racist practices of the past and their impacts, as it's been said, history is not dead. It's not even past. Those impacts are still with us today. Housing discrimination is at the root of most of the systemic issues that we face, because housing segregation gives you school segregation. Our schools, in spite of the best efforts of the 70s and 80s and 90s, are as segregated as they were in the 50s in many places. And we've already decided that separate is not equal. And so we still have that work to do. President Obama did what he could given the circumstances of that moment. And as we know, he could not be and was not the president of Black America. He was president of the United States of America. And after the first 2 years, the Congress did everything they could to oppose any and every initiative of his. He did accomplish some things. He did accomplish some reform in the sentencing laws. He did accomplish by implementing the mission and purpose of the EEOC, and by implementing the mission and purpose of the Health and Housing Commission, the things that they were supposed to do, and the Justice Department. But since then, much of that has been rolled back. And so I hope we can get back to the mission of the Justice Department, to end discrimination and to give everyone an opportunity. And so when you look at systemic racism, I'll take the court system as an example. If you have systematic exclusion of people from registering to vote, as we have seen all the different and subtle tactics that have been used to keep people from voting, they don't go on the jury, they don't go into the jury pool. And when you don't go into the jury pool from all across the population, then you still get predominantly white juries, and you often get, and we can't exclude the policing, we often get a disproportionate amount of Black persons in the court system, in the criminal justice system, and they get longer sentences for the same crimes that white people commit. People have been sent to get jobs, or not even appearing personally, but it's been demonstrated that if you send a resume in with a Black sounding name, higher human resources persons will discriminate against those resumes with Black sounding names. I named my daughter Somalia after the African country to give her a sense of pride in her heritage. But nowadays, I hear many young Black families are giving their children non-ethnic names, names that don't give them their historic pride, so that they won't face the discrimination today that still happens in employment. So that's just one or two examples of systemic racism. And unless we're fighting the status quo that has delivered to us all of the discrimination and all of the patterns of inequality that we see, then it's being perpetuated by supporting the status quo.
Thank you so much, Reverend. Lisa in Oceanside asks, what is the latest on the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act? Well, Lisa, a very timely question. We are reintroducing this bill, I think this week. In fact, it may be tomorrow or the next day, we'll be reintroducing it for the 117th Congress. As I mentioned, every bill that does not become law in one Congress needs to be reintroduced in the next Congress. And that's what we're going to do. And we're going to pass it in the House. I know there are still ongoing conversations about certain parts of the bill, but I thought it would be helpful if I just kind of give a high level. What we're trying to do here, in addition to police accountability, is to change the culture of law enforcement, to empower our communities and to build trust between law enforcement by addressing systemic racism. Specifically, the Justice in Policing Act would establish a national standard for the operation of police departments, would mandate data collection on police encounters, invest in transformative community-based policing programs, and streamline federal law to prosecute excessive force and establish independent prosecutors for police investigations. I can tell you that a number of law enforcement organizations here in California, or there in California, I'm in Washington right now, are open-minded and supportive of many of the provisions of this bill. We're going to pass it in the House. We're going to send it to the Senate. Now, you might remember 6 months ago or 8 months ago that we passed a bill, very similar bill. We sent it to the Senate and it died on Mitch McConnell's desk. as so many bills died when Mitch McConnell was the Senate Majority Leader. Now that he is the Senate Minority Leader and Chuck Schumer is the Majority Leader, we have his firm commitment that he will do everything possible to try to get the requisite 60 votes to get that bill not only a vote on the floor of the Senate, but passed in the Senate. And once it's passed in the Senate, we've got President Biden who will sign it into law. Now, it will require more work in the Senate, and you're going to need 10 Republican votes to get it across the finish line. And so I know that Karen Bass and Senator Cory Booker and others are going to be working very hard with our colleagues in the Senate. And there are some in the Senate that are very interested in working with us, like Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina. It won't be easy, but I think it's going to happen. And I think that the timing where we're introducing it and hopefully passing it in the House very early in the legislative session, giving the balance of the year and then on into next year until it gets a little closer to the election. And then it's just silly season again. Election season is always crazy, but we have a good 18-month window here to get serious things done. And I think the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is one of those things that we can get done. Darren in Carlsbad asks, can you please talk about the safety of the vaccine? Some people don't trust it. Well, I'm going to talk about it generally, and then Reverend, maybe if you want to talk about some of what we're seeing and hearing specifically in communities of color around vaccine hesitancy. So I just want to be absolutely clear about this. Doctors, public health experts, pretty much every scientist that has looked at it, they agree that the COVID-19 vaccine is safe, it is effective, and it's the closest thing we've had to a modern medical miracle in quite some time. All of these vaccine candidates have undergone rigorous testing and clinical trials. They have been authorized by the FDA after carefully reviewing data from tens of thousands of trial participants. Millions of Americans and people all around the world have gotten the vaccines. They continue to undergo robust safety monitoring, and we've seen just extraordinary rates of success in places where a large percentage of the population has been vaccinated. And I want to make also clear, you can't get sick with COVID from the vaccine. You might have mild side effects. You might feel a little bit achy, kind of like when you get a flu shot. There are very, very rare cases where there are allergic reactions, but they're incredibly rare, and your risk of getting COVID and getting really sick with COVID far exceeds your risk from anything that could happen with the vaccine. Earlier this week, the CDC, they held a national forum to try to build even more trust regarding the vaccine, and all experts assured everybody of the safety and efficacy of the vaccine. I know that there are some in the Black community that are perhaps more apprehensive, and I'd love, Reverend Shockley, if you'd want to speak to that for a minute.
Certainly, Mike. That is certainly a part of the legacy of racism in our country, all the way back to slavery and into the modern era, where Black persons were experimented upon, where they were enrolled in trials, medical trials, and not given the treatment that one would deserve for the kinds of diseases that they were inflicting upon them. And that Tuskegee experiment has resonated across the decades. Now, we continue to see Black women, particularly, even a Black woman like Serena Williams, unable to get the kind of treatment that she required without insisting of her needs and the treatment that she required. And there is a suspicion that physicians, generally white physicians, don't perceive the pain levels that Black people experience as requiring the same kind of medication and mitigation that they give to white patients. So there's a lot of suspicion around the Black community in regards to the medical establishment. However, coronavirus is deadly, and that we know for sure. I have talked with and have heard African-American physicians from coast to coast encourage people to take the vaccine. It is important that we vaccinate everyone because this is a contagious disease. We can't just vaccinate part of the population. If we're going to reach herd immunity, we've got to get up into the 70s and 80% of the population. And so many African-American physicians and medical professionals have looked at the science themselves and are encouraging everyone to take the vaccine. Now, I'm going to say something that's going to shock you, Mike. I'm 65. I know you don't believe it.
I don't believe you.
65.
Before you said you were a grandfather, I didn't believe that either.
And so I was eligible, and I had my first shot at Petco Park. And on this Sunday afternoon, I'm going down to get my second shot. And I had only a sore arm, as I did with the flu vaccine or any kind of injection. And I'm looking forward to my second shot so that I can hug my mother, who's 95, Auntie Shockley in Los Angeles, not your constituent, but my mama. And so that she can see her great-grandchildren. So every African-American medical professional I know is encouraging everyone to take the vaccine. It's important that we trust those whose trust we have. And that is coming from Black medical schools, Black physicians, Black medical professionals across the country are attesting to the safety, efficacy, and value of taking the vaccine.
Extremely well said. I still can't believe you're 65. We'll have to talk offline about the secret to being 65 and looking much less than 65. But what can I say? In the job I'm currently in, all I know is every time that I look in the mirror, I see new gray hair. You know, in this job in Congress. But all good. I'm so thrilled you got the vaccine and that you'll be able to see your mom. That's fantastic. Got a couple of specific questions for you from community members. One is from Ann, who asks, a lot of us are relying on local community groups and organizations to help each other get through this pandemic. Can Reverend Shockley talk about any resources his church has for the community during this pandemic, or maybe other organizations he's aware of who are helping people during this pandemic? And I know you referenced the food bank, but if you want to speak more about what your church is doing and other things you're seeing.
Yeah, there are many churches that participate in food distribution programs. And this is the tricky thing. In order to distribute the food to the community, we have to recruit volunteers to come out, risk their own health in order to be in a relatively close quarters, unloading, packing, and distributing food to people who need it. And so we are able to do that. And I thank our Pilgrim Church volunteers every month when they come out wearing their masks, keeping our distance as we can, but this is classified as essential work. And so it is. Beyond the food distribution that we do, it is the spiritual nurture that we provide to the community and that all churches provide. We continue to provide it virtually through Facebook Live on Pilgrim Facebook page, and other churches are meeting outdoors. Other churches are also online, and pastors are considered essential workers, and they continue to offer spiritual solace to people who are lonely and isolated and concerned about the world in which we're living.
Aaron in San Clemente asks, a lot of the reforms that you talk about probably won't happen without the buy-in of Republicans and conservatives who often oppose any kind of police reform. How can you convince them that reform is necessary? Well, Aaron, you might expect I've given this quite a lot of thought, particularly after what happened last year with the Justice and Policing Act. I think that public opinion is on our side. It's on the side of reform. I think that Americans are ready for change to be made. And I think that the key here is that we are inclusive as possible of all conversation from and all ideas from Republicans in the Senate who in a good faith way want to work with us. We've got to find 10 Republicans in favor of reform out of the 50 in the Senate. I think we can do it. I know Tim Scott of South Carolina led the efforts last time to try to work with Cory Booker and then Senator Kamala Harris and others in the Senate. I think we can get there. Not every issue needs to be a completely partisan issue. And I'd like to believe that there are 10 Republicans that are willing to work with us. Now, will the final product be exactly what we pass in the House? Of course not. Of course not. But can we make substantive and real progress that'll improve the lives of people across the country? I have no question that we can. And I think we're going to do everything we can to fight and to find out. And if I know anything about our friend Karen Bass and about Cory Booker, they are fighters, and they're not going to take no for an answer very easily. They're going to keep person by person, senator by senator, keep trying to find those 10 that'll come our way. Now, we know it's not always easy to find 10 Republican senators to agree on things that we believe. Just look at how they voted on the recent, after the events of January 6th, the recent trial where only 7 of them decided that the president needed to be held to account. So it's not easy, but that ultimately is no reason for us to give up. We've just got to keep fighting and working hard. And, you know, I can tell you that I try every single day in the Congress to work with anybody that wants to work with me, whether they're Democrat, Republican, little difference to me. We got to work with everybody across the political aisle to try to get things done. And that's, there's no exception to this. So, Reverend, that's it for the constituent questions. I am so grateful that you joined us this week. And I feel like a lot has happened since we had you last in the country. Obviously, we had an election. We had some historic events in January, some exciting, some very scary. But I think we have a real opportunity now in the next, say, year or so, year to year and a half, to have some truly transformative change in this country. And when I think of our local leaders in our district who are at the forefront of that change, trying to bring people together across the community, I think of you. And I'm just so grateful that you're here. And I want to make sure that you have an opportunity for closing remarks. And please make sure that you share how people can learn more about the church, how they can follow you, where they can get that list of books, and anything else that we should know.
I think that you're right. We are in a new moment. We have seen what division and hatred and violence have done to our country. We have lost that glow. We've lost that sheen and that shine that says we are leading the way in the world toward a more perfect union. We've taken some big steps back. But now that we have calmed the waters and taken down the temperature, we have an opportunity as a culture to come together again, to start talking to each other again, to listen to each other again. That is the only way forward. We have a lot of work to do, but unless we work together, we'll never accomplish it. You can find Pilgrim United Church of Christ on Facebook. Just search for Pilgrim Carlsbad. There are a lot of pilgrims in the country, but there's only one in Pilgrim Carlsbad. Also, we have our YouTube channel at Pilgrim UCC. You can find us there. And of course, we're located at 2020 Chestnut Avenue, right across the street from Carlsbad High School. That is the only way forward. A number of churches are working on this issue of dismantling systemic racism, who are on the campaign for anti-racism. And that is the term of the moment. It's not enough to say, I'm not racist. We have to get on board to be anti-racist, to be deliberately and aggressively anti-racist, and to root out its impacts, to root out its sources, and to root out its ramifications for our society. At Pilgrim Church, we've been reading in our anti-racism book club. Since George Floyd's incident, there was great interest. So we have read White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. We have read Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. We have read The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. We have read Notes of a Native Son by James Baldwin. And I recommend all of those books to you to prepare for really the hard work of turning around a history of 400 years. That won't be accomplished in 1 year or 4 years or even this next decade. But until we change directions and start going in the anti-racism direction, we can't make the progress that we need. This is the season of Lent. And in our tradition, in the Christian tradition, that is a time of self-reflection and of repentance. We were talking about it last night. The word repentance comes from the Greek metanoia, which technically means to change directions, to turn and go the other way. And so I implore all Americans to look our history square in the eye, to understand from whence we've come, and decide that our future has to be better than our past for all people. That will not only end active and ongoing racism and discrimination, but we will work until we undo the impacts that have their terrible, terrible results in all of the statistics that we can read, whether it's mass incarceration, undereducation, underemployment, until we work together to make opportunity equal for everyone and to undo the burden of these 400 years on you and on me, we cannot achieve our goal.
Wow. I can't follow that one. But the good news, Reverend, is I do have 10 hours on an airplane each week, going back and forth between San Diego and Washington, D.C. And I can read some of those books. So I was taking some notes, and we'll compare notes next time I have you on. I want to thank our team for helping to put this together, our great Washington, D.C. Office, our chief, Caravan Stralin, our communications director, Eric Mee, the whole team in the district office as well, and Jeremy for bringing us together on video conference. And before we go, I wanted to end on some good news, which is that if you saw our event with Karen Bass recently or listened to it online or via podcast, you knew that we had not just one great guest, but two. In addition to Karen Bass, we had Satya Austin, the head of the North County San Diego NAACP, the president, and she is such an inspiring leader for Black youth and people of color in our district. And the good news is that we have named her the February constituent of the month, because even though she's gotten some recognition for all her good work, I think she deserves more. And we have so much more work to do to confront inequality in our country. But I'm thankful for people like Satya and for people like Reverend Shockley, who are so passionate about helping people succeed in just changing their thinking and improving our society. And as we keep coming together to address racial injustice, it'll be leaders like Satya and like Reverend Shockley and like Representative Bass who bring me hope, who bring me inspiration. Last thing I'll say, love to my wife, Chrissy, and our kids. I'll see you soon. To my parents and in-laws, I love you all very much. And that's it for now. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.